Tonight we are in Glasgow, in Maryhill Borough Hall, where Labour launched their 2019 general election campaign that produced just one MP for the party in Scotland. 5 years on, another general election saw Scotland's biggest city switch from SNP yellow to Labour red. So what does that mean for the people here and across Scotland? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland where you get to ask the questions that matter to you, answering them on our panel this evening. From the University of Glasgow, the Director of the Centre for Public Policy, Professor Nicola McEwen. Nicola is the co-founder of the Centre on Constitutional Change. She also hosts a podcast with the former Labour leader, Kezia Dugdale. From Scottish Labour, the MSP for Glasgow, Pam Duncan-Glancy, party spokesperson for Education and Skills. Pam has been an active Labour member for over 20 years and previously worked for Public Health Scotland. Also with us this evening, journalist and columnist Kevin McKenna. Kevin has worked in newspapers for over 35 years, former editor of the Herald and executive editor of the Scottish Daily Mail. He's also written for titles including The Times, The Scotsman and The National. From the Scottish Conservatives, Councillor Thomas Kerr. Thomas joined the party aged 14 and has been leader of the Conservative group in Glasgow for the past 6 years. And finally, from the SNP, Ben Macpherson is the MSP for Edinburgh Northern and Leith. Ben served as a Scottish Government Minister for 5 years, covering Europe, migration, social security and local government as well. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And of course, welcome to our studio audience here in Maryhill. It's great to be back with you here. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be in Scotland tonight. BBCDN is the hashtag you need on social media. And our Debate Night podcast will be available for you to download straight after the show. So let's get started. We've got a lot to get through on this. Our first show back after the election. Our first question comes from Ryan Adam. Ryan, good evening.
Good evening, Stephen. Good evening, panel. What did the results of Thursday night mean for Scotland as a whole?
Thank you, Ryan. So, Labour landslide here and across the country. SNP lost 500,000 votes. Tory vote share almost halved. Before I come to the panel this evening, let's hear from you. You were the voters in this general election. You happy with the result? Did you get the result that you wanted on Thursday night? Lady in the white top. Yes, on you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody in Scotland was looking for change. And obviously that happened. I'm not sure that if it happened in a way that was meaningful, because I think there was a bit of a voting against the Tories, just to make sure that they were out, and also the SNP. So therefore, I'm not sure if it's what the Labour would have wanted, particularly to get in by default, really.
If you were a tactical voter on Thursday, love to hear from you. Gentleman in the navy top first, on you go.
Yeah, I think the country's been screaming for change. We've been governed poorly for the last 17 years by the SNP, and I think the general election showed that the country wanted to be voting Labour in.
Thank you. And the other gentleman just down on the aisle here. Yes, on you go.
Hi, I agree with the guy in front. I mean, over the last few years, I've voted Lib Dem, Scottish Labour, Scottish Conservative, all because I didn't think the SNP were governing the country well. I don't know if Labour will do any better now, given Westminster's changed and Holyrood is still what it is, but at least we get to see what happens.
Thank you. And on the front row here.
I did something on Thursday that I've never done before, which was to spoil my vote, because I'm a passionate believer in independence from Scotland, and there wasn't a party available to me in West Dunbartonshire I could decently vote for. I think also I did it that way because, like the 500,000 people you're talking about, I wanted a very loud message to be sent to the SNP from the wider independence movement that it's not good enough and they have to sort themselves out now or possibly dissolve themselves because they are not carrying us towards independence.
Thank you. We might well come to that over the course of the next 60 minutes. Pam Duncan-Glancy, Labour won the election, but this was a UK election for a Westminster Parliament. What's it going to mean for Scotland? What's it going to mean for Holyrood?
Well, first and foremost, I think it will show that we will end the 14 years of chaos, of toxicity in our politics, and of division. And I think that's what the people of Scotland want. We've heard it tonight from people in our audience, and we heard it on the doorstep on a regular basis. that people were desperate for change. They were tired, sick and tired of what the Tories were doing to this country, and they want change in Holyrood too. And so what happened on Thursday, we're incredibly grateful for every single vote in Scotland, and we will work solidly, day in, day out, to earn the trust of the people who put their faith in us to run the country and deliver the change that we promised during that election.
That's all very well, but what does that mean
one.
for Scotland? What does that mean for the people in the room here this evening? People who are facing a cost of living crisis
Yep.
and huge pressures in their lives.
Yep. Well, the first thing I think that we can probably all see when we put on our TV now is that we've got a Prime Minister and a Cabinet who are serious about changing the country, who've got to the job from day one. I mean, we're on Wednesday, just after the election, 3 working days, 5 days since the election, and we've already seen significant inroads in the work that we promised to do. There's the announcement of the National Wealth Fund, which will crowd in funding for Scotland, deliver jobs. We've got the new deal for working people, which of course will deliver a pay rise for 200,000 Scots.
And crucially, Keir Starmer's been here and met the First Minister.
Yeah, and I think actually that probably signalled one of the biggest changes that we've seen, which is a government that's serious about cooperation and wanting to put the politics of division to bed, because people don't want that. They want the government governing in the interests of the country, not party, and in the interests of working people, and that's what we'll get with the Labour government.
Ben Macpherson from the SNP, when that exit poll dropped on Thursday night, what did you think then?
Obviously, for us in the SNP, it was a very difficult election. We lost some really capable colleagues in the House of Commons, some really good community representatives and their teams. And even though we secured around 30% of the votes cast, Labour 35%, we of course ended up with a small number of seats in comparison to what we had.
Were you surprised by the extent of it then? Were you shocked by it?
I think on the doors, certainly in the areas in my constituency where I was campaigning, it felt much closer. But we know that people voted in this election for a variety of reasons, and a big reason was to get rid of the Tories, and mostly because of what happened in England. That's proven to be the case, and thank goodness for it. But also, you know, we understand as a party that we need to, and we want to listen to the message that the electorate has sent us. Even though we have a very strong record in many, many ways, and people in this audience and who are watching this programme will be benefiting from the things that the SNP government is doing in Scotland and has done in Scotland that aren't available elsewhere. But we want to reflect on this result, and we will take this message and we will move forward in time once we've done that listening, but we'll keep listening. We'll come forward in terms of both the programme for government that the First Minister will set out to Parliament in the autumn, and then also in the years ahead, making the strong case for our record and for the things we now want to do. And actually, the question was, what does it mean for Scotland? One of the big changes, of course, is that the Labour Party now have significant power in the UK. They have their levers on the powers of the Treasury. If there's austerity that's continued, it will be Labour's choice. If the Scottish Government's budget is cut, it will be Labour's choice. So, you know, we'll be holding the Labour Party to account in all sorts of ways. They've made a commitment to change. Let's see if it's real change or short change.
Much like the start of a new relationship between the SNP and Labour.
Well, I mean, that's, look, there is a huge amount of positivity in this as well, and that, you know, we wanted to see the end of the Tory government. That's a good thing. And in good faith, the First Minister and the Prime Minister have met, and there's a commitment from the UK government to improve intergovernmental relations. And I do take the point that, you know, I do think this is a new chapter in the 21st century of Scottish politics, and we have an opportunity to, collectively to engage in a more constructive, solution-focused political dialogue, and we in the SNP need to absolutely be there for that.
OK, Ryan, you asked the question, what do you think the election result means for Scotland?
I think most of the country voted for change. Me personally, I was annoyed because it feels like for the past couple of years, Holyrood and Westminster have been bickering like siblings. SNP and Tory be at each other's throats. It's been, for example, the Scottish Government saying we can't do it because of Westminster. Westminster coming to Scotland saying this is our project with our money, but it's got nothing to do with them. guys, we're in a situation here where the country's probably in the worst state than it is for the past decade. Can we actually just get everyone on the same page and actually start working for a change and just not bickering and actually get the country moving again? And I think that was my feeling, because I've been a voter and I was kind of unsure who to vote for this election, but I looked at it and thinking, who's going to do the best for Scotland? Who's actually going to, I think, actually give a shot? And I want my politics to be boring. And I'm going to be honest, the Tories and the SNP have been a wee bit too excited in the past couple of years. So overall, if hopefully this turns a page, although I'm slightly dismayed at your comments are at the fact that you're getting your excuses in early, that Westminster is going to basically cut your throat.
Can I address that? Go on, Ben. I respect your feedback, sir, but it's when there's a question of where does power lie in the devolution settlement under the Scotland Act. Some powers are reserved to the UK Parliament and some powers aren't. And we need to have an honest debate about that. Now, look, I don't think it's right to say that everything's Westminster's problem. And the SNP hasn't said that. We need to own both our achievements and our good record, but also things we need to do better in government. And we absolutely do, and we will going forward.
But I think one thing I felt from the campaign as a whole is there was a lot of talk about devolved issues. Okay, I think the Lib Dem, who's not been represented tonight on the panel, but I think they knocked about, they're bickering about NHS and dentists, which is a devolved issue. And I think that was the biggest problem here. I think a lot of people voted maybe away from the SNP because they saw, why is my councils in such a bad situation? Why is there another train strike happening as of today? Why am I possibly having another bin strike, which is possibly all within your bag at Holyrood, but I feel you hit it because people are going, well, I can vote with my feet now.
Yeah,
but it's all
hang on, we'll pick up on these points in just a second, Ben. You know why you voted the way you did, so I'd like to hear from you tonight, the key issues for you that drove you to whether you were a tactical voter or not. Nicola McEwen, what can we extrapolate from the election result in Scotland as to people's intentions and why they did what they did?
So I think there are a number of different reasons at play here. I think that we're hearing a lot about change, and that also tells us what an effective political slogan that was for the Labour Party to use, because it can mean whatever you want it to mean. Okay, it can capture the sense of frustration that people clearly had. It isn't a programme for government, because that's when the hard choices have to be made, where decisions have to be made within government that might please some people and annoy others and create winners and losers. And that's where the harder task will come for the new government. For Scotland, I mean, I think I agree with some of what Ben was saying in that there is a really complicated division of powers now between the Scottish Parliament and the UK Parliament. And that has become more complicated in the last few years. And the relationship between the two governments has been dire. It's been really difficult to get things done and to get them to work together. And I hear that all the time from public, a frustration, why can't they just get on and get things done? And I would hope that the new government might start to reset that relationship, but they've not really promised a whole lot in terms of resolving some of the difficult constitutional issues that are there. They have talked about goodwill, resetting a relationship, a spirit of cooperation, and that will have to cut both ways. But actually addressing some of the really difficult things around the financial settlement, around borrowing powers, around when you reach the limits of devolved power, is the UK government going to help to collaborate and work on those problems? I think we have to wait and see.
Okay, let me hear from the audience. Lady in the stripy top.
I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, but I do agree with regards to the slogan, the change. It's meaningless. Change was used with Pamela about 5-10 times there in one sentence. I think I voted SNP, and basically I done that because I think giving any party a super majority, which Labour now sit with, down in Westminster, I think is dangerous. We learnt that with Tories. They had a really big majority. We had, up here in Scotland, we could have voted other parties to try and keep some of that leverage. to be able to stick up for Scotland when and if needed.
Okay, thank you. Man in the glasses.
I think people need to remember that at the independence referendum, all Labour, Conservatives and Liberal Democrats signed a pledge, putting a nice big picture, front page papers, promising Scotland Devo Max to give us all the powers so that they could have potentially destroyed the independence reason because people want more power to control. They had that opportunity, they didn't. I mean, I'm a pro-independence person. I was unhappy when the vote went the other way, but accept it. But they didn't pull up their side. They promised to stay in the European Union, and they promised Devo Max. That's promises from a party, so you've got 2 years to try and convince Scotland to vote for you properly in the actual Scotland election before you can prove yourselves as the party working for Scotland.
And as a supporter of independence, what did you take from the result on Thursday night?
I think a lot of people voted tactically as well. I know there is some people would change, but I think there was a lot of tactical. It was, to me, the scare story of Labour saying if you vote the SNP, you'll get Conservatives because they didn't have faith in their counterparts down south to vote for them, so they didn't believe they could get the seats because mathematically that was a complete lie. But it was a story that was put out time and time again. Every election, if you vote SNP, you get Conservative down south, and you get a Conservative government because obviously we're outnumbered. So, which is another reason why we should have independence to control our own faculties.
Okay, we might come back to that in just a second. Man in the blue shirt here. Yes.
There were three main things that I took from the election. First of all, I thought the campaigning in the main from all the parties was really negative. It was mostly based on other parties' failures rather than what they were actually going to do. The second issue, which I find quite disgraceful, was that the issue of poverty was basically never discussed. And the number of people in Scotland and in England and in Wales and in Northern Ireland that are suffering so much just now, I just felt were mostly ignored during the campaigning because the parties had their own agendas. And the third thing, which I think all parties should be a wee bit concerned about, was, this was after the event, was the turnout.
Yeah.
The fact that it was about 60%, I believe, means that 40% of eligible voters are basically saying no. And I think somebody's got to address that positively.
Let's pick up on that now, actually. Thomas Kerr from the Scottish Conservatives. Well, firstly, not a great night for the Conservatives in Scotland. Dreadful night across the country, obviously. Is it time for your party to go its own way in Scotland? That's what Murdo Fraser previously has said here. Is this the time? Is this the moment?
Well, it was a bruising result for the Conservatives across the UK. We bucked the trend in Scotland, holding 5 of our 6 seats, which was a good result considering people were saying that we were going to be wiped out. And in the 6th seat, we were just 1,000 or so votes away from winning it.
You lost your deposit, though, here in Glasgow.
So I was going to come back to that because what I did pick up, though, is that our concentration as a party on key seats has to switch away because across the Central Belt, here in Glasgow and other places, we did lose our deposit. Now, that was for 2 reasons. One, because people, as we were hearing, were tactically voting because there was loads of people who wanted to send the SNP a message and who'd voted Labour. But the other was because there was a rise in the reform vote. And to me, that's a very clear message that my party has to stop this no to NDRF 2 status, and we need to start talking about people's real issues because, as we heard there, it was a very negative campaign about who is best to beat. And I think that as a centre-right politician in Scotland, we need to get back to talking about the issues because I think that that's where we win. I joined the Conservatives at age 14. I'm from the East End of Glasgow. Both my parents grew up with I grew up with both my parents who had addiction issues. I joined the Conservatives because I believe passionately in the values of the centre-right policies that the Conservatives have to do. So I'm open to the idea of a discussion in the leadership contest in the next couple of months about whether or not we do that in a more separate way. But I think we need to get back to putting forward a positive message of what Conservatives can do in Scotland.
And on specifically that gentleman's point about turnout, in this constituency, almost half people here didn't actually vote. Is that a concern?
It's a huge concern. There was a scunneredness across the whole country with people who were fed up with politicians. They're fed up with my party, and that's how we got a kicking down south. They're fed up with Ben's party. That's why Ben's party went to down in 9 seats. And even though Pam had a fantastic result for Labour, turnout was still dramatically down. So we all have a position to try and make sure that we show people we're delivering. My party has to learn more to be able to speak. So does Ben's party, and I think I'm hoping that's what Ben's about to come in and say. And Labour now has a chance to deliver. Let's see what happens, but I am very worried about turnout.
Ben?
Can I just I think that the gentleman at the front earlier made a really important point about we need to get into a position where in election campaigns there's much more emphasis on positivity, solutions and proposals to make things better rather than criticising the opposition. And I think It's an opportunity now for all parties to pivot to being much more positive and forward-thinking and solution-focused in future elections. So I think there's a lesson out of that.
Kevin McKenna, we'll come on to turnout in a second, but overall, what did you take from the general election result last week?
Call me a cynic, but I don't think there'll be any change in Scotland. There's so much that I disagree with the points that have been made already. Ben was talking about how he expects 9 MPs at Westminster to hold the Labour government to account. They couldn't do it with 47. There's this narrative of denial that is being espoused by the SNP that they suffered because of a vote for the Tories, or rather a kind of need to kick the Tories out. I went to all points of the compass in Scotland with MPs and MSPs from every single party on the doorsteps, and what was coming over loud and clear from SNP activists and SNP supporters, this wasn't a tactical thing, right, we're going to vote Labour to give the SNP a kicking. This was sheer, utter loathing of the SNP from their own people, because they felt let down, they felt betrayed, and there was nothing that they were being told by SNP people on the doorsteps in terms of achievements that would mitigate that. But also with Labour, I mean, come on. First of all I heard for the last 6 weeks, and latterly from Anis Sarwar, because this was the messaging that was going to all the Labour MPs and candidates, was change, change, change. What's the first thing they do? They appoint Ian Murray. Ian Murray is the Scotland Office Minister. Ian Murray is the most toxic pro-union Labour MP in the Labour Party in Scotland. This is a guy who, when he went, I mean, I think he's been the House of Commons hide-and-seek champion since he got there. Nobody can see him, right? He's
Kevin, that's unfair.
No, it's not. It's not. I remember several years ago, and I wrote a column about this. He was wasting our time, and he was insulting our intelligence by writing a letter to the House of Commons Standards Committee, I think, because the SNP in Scotland had devoted 8 or 9 civil servants to look at the possibility of what would happen if there was an independent Scotland. Even Adam Tompkins of the Tories rebuked him for that and said, you need to take people seriously and stop that performative nonsense. So after 6 weeks of saying we're going to have change, they appoint Ian Murray. Meanwhile, you get real, Labour had some excellent candidates, like Torquil Crichton in the Western Isles.
You don't think they're serious about building bridges?
No, well, it doesn't matter anyway, because Labour have got such a massive majority in the UK. It doesn't matter how many MPs that they got last Thursday. They'll do nothing for Scotland. I don't see anything. Labour could do. Labour could do something. I'll get 2 seconds. Labour could do something in Scotland if they win the 2026 Scottish election. And as Anis Sarwar said, and I do agree with him, the campaign for that starts now. But I'll have something to say about that as well. But
all right,
Pam.
okay, Pam.
I don't doubt that you will, Kevin. And the campaign for 26 does, of course, start now. But it's not just a campaign or a slogan. People are desperate to see things differently in Scotland. They are desperate to get the waiting lists on the NHS down. They're desperate to sort the education system in Scotland. They're desperate to sort the £5 billion of funding that the Scottish Government have wasted. They desperately want a different government. And I believe fundamentally that over the next 2 years, we've got a job to do to convince the people of Scotland that Labour can carry on the work that we will hopefully start and have already started across the UK. But to say that Ian Murray doesn't represent change really is nonsense. Actually, Ian Murray's been one of the strongest advocates for the Scottish people in Westminster for a long time.
Well, he's the only one from Scottish Labour for a long time.
He was, but what he'll have learned, and I would imagine from the SNP MPs who were there, that shouting from the opposition benches, I sit on the opposition benches, it is excruciatingly frustrating to sit on the opposition benches. I would give anything for a day to sit in the government bench so that I could make the change that I know that the Labour Party will.
All right, well,
and that's why sending Ian Murray and appointing Ian Murray as the
member for
Scotland does
Morningside
represent change.
All right, we will see. We will see your views on all of this from home. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We're in Maryhill in Glasgow tonight, and then after this, we're off for our summer break. But we're back with you in September, continuing our journey right around Scotland over the autumn and winter. Keep an eye on the website, bbc.co.uk/debate night to find out where we are going to be. Let's go to our second question of the night, which comes from Stephen Dunn. Stephen, evening.
Good evening, panel. Does the panel believe that supporters of independence should accept that with this new political landscape, hope for another democratic vote for an independent Scotland is all but gone?
Thank you, Stephen. March 2023, Ben Macpherson, you said, better to go down a gear and take the journey at a reasonably safe speed than to crash trying to rush things. Is that what happened last Thursday? Did you crash?
No, but I do. So that quote you just referenced, that was me expressing my concerns about the proposals that there were for a de facto referendum from some.
And you were right, weren't you?
I think, look, independence is still supported by around 50% of the population in Scotland. And that is something that is undeniable. The polling's consistent. I think this election does honestly emphasise, though, that achieving constitutional change is really difficult. The SNP is 90 years old this year. The campaign for re-establishing Scottish statehood has been going for around 100 years. So I think we can take huge confidence, those of us who want to realise home rule, more powers, statehood for Scotland, wherever we sit in that spectrum, in that there's a huge amount of higher support for more powers for Scotland, for home rule, for statehood, independence. And we need to somehow, and there's opportunities here, get out of the stalemate that we've been in my view, for too many years, and progress the argument. And there's an opportunity to put a lot of pressure on the UK government in the period ahead as to what powers...
MPs.
No, with that support for independence being at around 50% consistently, with a Scottish government and a Scottish Parliament where there's majority support for independence, with the fact that the question isn't going away, and particularly generationally, younger people support independence and more powers for the Scottish Parliament and want to see that realised, and that's only going to grow. So the question of Scotland's statehood and more powers for the Scottish Parliament isn't going away as a result of the election. But we do have to think creatively and collaboratively about getting out of the cul-de-sac, getting out of a stalemate and making progress. And to me, the big question is, one, how does Scotland get another referendum if winning a Scottish Parliament election with a majority of MSPs doesn't make the UK government honour democracy and give another referendum? And also, how do we get to a position where we are able to achieve that democratic vote? And to me, we have to keep building the argument for independence so that the political pressure grows and grows and becomes overwhelming, that in order to continue to be respected at an international level and hold any sense of being democratically fair, the pressure on a UK government would become overwhelming.
Or you get support from more than 50% of the Scottish people, and they're here tonight, so let's see how that would work. Lady in the glasses there.
That was just what I was about to say there. We actually need more than 50%. We need it to push far more than that before we even spend money in taking the independence votes or discussing independence. Maybe we should start with basics. We've got a new government now in Parliament. Let's work with that. Let's get the country better. Let's see things moving forward and not going back the way the previous government did. Let's start building bridges, keep it going, and get this country back on track. Not independence.
Hang on a second, Ben. I just want to get some more people in here. Gentlemen on the aisle down there. Yes, on you go. Yes.
You keep mentioning this mythical 50%. I mean, even in the Indie Ref, you got 37% of the electorate
it's not
who
a
could
mythical
vote, which is actually only about 3/10 of the Scottish population. The polls are not counting the don't knows in your 50%. So you have in no way demonstrated, as Sturgeon said after the IndyRef, this continued support for independence. I mean, at the moment, Scotland has the government that Scotland voted for. That's the first time that's been here for a while. So should we not give it a chance and see what's going to happen?
OK, hang on a second. I'll just hear from the lady on the front row down here in the blue jacket. Yes, on you go.
I was born in Maryhill in 1937, and I came back to Maryhill in the last couple of years, and you know what? Nothing's changed. It's exactly the same. And Labour were in for a long time, and the SNP, and I don't see any change. And this lady, Pam, was saying, why are 40% of people not voting, especially in Maryhill? Because they have no hope. Nothing has changed, whether it's SNP or Labour.
Thank you. Nicola McEwen, this result we saw last Thursday, is that likely to be repeated in 2026?
In the Holyrood elections in 2026? Not necessarily. I mean, I think, I have to say I am a bit worried about the idea of the campaign for the Scottish elections starting now, because if this is all going to be about party competition, then that is rather going to make it harder to have that cooperative working that everybody here has been looking for and searching for.
So you need some breathing space.
I think you do need some breathing. I think you need to, in my idealistic world, you need to park some of the sort of party political stuff in order to try to tackle some of the really big policy challenges that people have been facing. And that requires cooperation, not just competition. So that does worry me a wee bit. I do think, though, that the election result does mark the end of a period that began in the run-up to the independence referendum, and where we've had a decade of politics has been dominated by the independence issue. I think we are at the end of that, but you're right. Independence remains high historically in terms of public opinion. It is that we used to talk about the Scottish Parliament as being the settled will of the Scottish people. That was John Smith's famous phrase. Independence is not that, but neither is union, because Scotland is still split more or less down the middle in terms of where people see the future of the country. The election last week doesn't change that, but it does create an opportunity for a Labour government to create a United Kingdom where people in Scotland feel at home, and to help resolve some of the really important issues that are obstructing devolution at the moment.
Back to the audience. Has hope for another democratic referendum gone? Lady in the glasses here. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the important thing we need to focus on now is to make the country better. Before any political party, we are a nation. We need to address certain things that are important to us. We need to prioritize what is important. The poverty, the schools, the education, the health, they are important. We need to work together at the moment to get the country where we want it to be. Before anything else, we need that change. It doesn't matter which way it comes from. We need to expect that change, and we want it to happen.
So Ben would say, if you don't mind me putting words in your mouth, that an independent Scotland is the way to really change that.
Not at the moment. Now, we need to get the country to where we want it to be. We want to see that change happening. We want to see it physically and in any area. We want to see it. We want to make the country to be better.
Thank you. And man in the navy top here.
What I would say is, govern with the powers that you've got. Do that well, and then that might change people's opinions. Because at the moment you keep going on about Westminster stopping you from doing it. Govern with the powers you've got. Show people that, you know, and you can do well with independence. I'm not an independent supporter, but that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, thank you. Kevin McKenna, what does Thursday's result mean for the independence debate?
I think that I've just come from my niece's wedding, and I'm hoping to go back. And
if we get a move on.
Congratulations, Claire Louise and Jamie. I'll join you later.
That'll explain the shoes.
So I was there earlier today, and my family, 3 generations of it, and there were dozens of us there today. We come from a traditional Labour family, have voted Labour for generations. All the good things that have happened with our family and to this city and this country have happened because of the Labour Party. And I will always have that residual heart for the Labour Party. Every social improvement that ordinary working people have benefited from in this country, in Scotland, has come from the Labour Party. However, in terms of independence in the SNP, we've got an issue here because the SNP have probably done more, in my opinion, done more damage to the cause of independence than the Labour Party and the Conservative Party put together. Now, OK, that's impossible to quantify, but again, I have to go back to my, OK, sorry for using this phrase, lived experience on the doorsteps with all manner of candidates over the last 6 weeks. And this was coming up consistently. This was hardened pro-SNP supporters utterly sickened with their party, their alliance with the Greens, the trans ideology, the fact that they don't have a policy, or they're shilly-shallying over North Sea oil. Unless something happens, and when I say happen, I mean there has to be a clear-out at the top of the SNP. The NEC has to be completely reformed. Jim Sillars, who's probably the only proper intellect in the wider nationalist movement, wrote a letter to my paper and other papers yesterday, when he said more or less what I'm saying, except probably more eloquently, but there has to be a root and branch reform, top, middle and bottom of that toxic, poisonous party, or else independence is done for the generation. Now, I'm talking about this wedding. The young people that you say are probably more inclined towards independence. The young people in my family were all saying to me today, because I told them that I was coming on here tonight, and they said, we will never see this in our generation. We will never see independence in our generation because the SNP, and I won't use the 6-letter word ending in ED, rhyming with Friar Tuck, basically have done that to independence. Now, that's what they're saying.
OK.
That's what they're saying.
Ben is listening carefully to you. Ben, go on.
I mean, your anecdotal personal experience is very interesting, and thanks for patronising me and my colleagues. But I think we have to also get real here in that while we accept that it was a difficult night for us.
How more real does it get when visiting doorsteps? Is that not real?
I listened respectfully to you. I would be grateful if you would listen respectfully to me. So the SNP still achieved around 30% of the votes in Scotland. And the idea that you can say that the SNP has not progressed the cause of independence, the Scottish Parliament has many more powers as a result of the SNP's electoral success. I delivered the Scottish Child Payment when I was Social Security Minister, lifting 100,000 children out of poverty. That's the difference the SNP has made, and that's why it still has strong support. We take the result with humility, but we are proud of our record and we'll continue to try and build on it.
Let's hear from the audience. Blonde lady in the second row.
Need to look within themselves. Yeah. Within Holyrood, all you talk about, not you personally, but as a party, division and hate. We've seen bills such as the GRR and also the hate bill, and the subliminal messages that come through time and time again is how we should hate our neighbour for no reason whatsoever. And the focus again is always on men. So we need to have a party there that actually cares about everyone as a whole. We're supposed to be the friendliest nation in the world, and over the last year there's been nothing but hate, hate, hate coming from the leading party in Holyrood, and that needs to change. Mr Swinney doesn't even know. He stumbled last week when he was asked how many genders there are, which is a very straightforward question based on the bills that have came forward. So it's time to look within yourselves as a party, pull your socks up and get on with it, and be a party that people can rely on.
OK, thank you. Pam Duncan-Glancy, where does the debate over independence go as a result of last Thursday's vote?
So the thing that's really come across quite clearly last Thursday is that there's a mandate from all the nations, including Scotland, for a Labour government. And I'm really proud of that because it was hard fought. There was a lot of work, and our activists worked day in, day out to get that. And I agree with Nicola about the point that actually the next 2 years is not about division, it's about proving that in government we can change lives and that we can be serious people. And I think we've already shown that when you see the work that's already come out of government so far, when we see the calls that Business and Trade Secretary Johnny Reynolds has made this afternoon to look at crowding investment.
That's not the question. The question's about independence. Has independence gone away as a result of last Thursday's vote?
I don't think people's opinions will have hugely changed since last Thursday. But what I will say is that people have looked to reset. They've been desperate, and I'll say change again, I'm afraid. They've been desperate for change, and one of the things they thought was the fastest way was to run away as quickly as they possibly could from the toxicity and the chaos of 14 years of the Tory government we've just had. My view is the answer to that is a Labour government, and that's what I think we'll see, and that's what I think will mean that people will see the real change happening in their lives that can happen under a Labour government. Kevin McKenna made the point about the huge social change that's been made under a Labour government. A Labour government lifted 1 million children out of poverty. There are 30,000 children more in poverty now in Scotland than when the SNP came to power. And we're about to change workers' rights, the biggest change in workers' rights for a generation. That's the change that a Labour government can bring, and I think that will give the hope that people need.
And imagine if the Scottish Parliament had control over employment law, we could have made a difference.
All right, well, let me hear from more people in the audience. Lady right in the middle has had her hand up for ages. Yes, on you go.
Firstly, I agree with Kevin, mostly what Kevin McKenna said. But I want to say the Labour Party only got 30% of the vote, I think, overall in the UK. 34. But if Keir Starmer believes in a democracy and wants to collaborate with people, if he believes in the Good Friday Agreement, which gives them in Northern Ireland, which is a mere province, not a country, if it gives them a referendum every 7 years, then we should get that in Scotland. He can't have one thing for one and one thing for another.
Nicola McEwen, is that a point of difficulty for him?
So I think, on the point about the share of the vote, so the first past the post system hugely exaggerates the Labour Party's support, both in Scotland and in the UK as a whole. And they've got this massive majority on, historically, a very low share of the vote for a governing party. So that's one thing. On your second point, though, I absolutely agree with you. I think that the independence referendum issue has gone away. There is no imminent threat or opportunity, depending on your perspective, of a referendum in the next couple of years. I think the election result has changed that. So I think use this calm time to explore what would a process be. I mean, and there may not be, but it may be the case that the people of Scotland in the future do want independence in a clear majority. So how do you do that? In a legal way, in a fair way, in a democratic way, and in a consensual way. And to me, it seems that this is the ideal opportune time to calmly reflect on those sorts of issues, just like Northern Ireland.
One person is democracy. 50 plus 1. We're at 52 now. 52%. We could have a referendum tomorrow on that. Given that in Northern Ireland, on 52%, they can have a referendum.
All right, Thomas Kerr?
Well, look, Ben said a phrase which is, to Kevin, let's be real. So let's be real about what happened last week. And I get that there'll be people in this audience who will disagree with what I'm about to say. But the reality is, as I said at the start, my party had a bruising election result across the UK. But were people in Scotland seen as the key competitors against the SNP, they voted Conservative. Were they seen Labour as the key competitors, they voted for Labour. Were they seen the Lib Dems, they voted for Lib Dems. John Swinney said that page 1, line 1 was going to be that there would be a referendum on independence. Scotland has resoundingly, last week alone, said they don't want another referendum. And I'm sorry, but the division that we are having when we constantly keep having this conversation is meaning that priorities inside... It means that priorities that I'm facing here in Glasgow as a councillor are not being discussed. So when we look at £500 billion being ripped out of Glasgow City Council from the SNP, we're not discussing that. We're not discussing the education standards that we're facing in Scotland. We're not discussing the NHS because, once again, we're yet again talking about independence. And I'm sorry, but last week we had a resounding vote across Scotland. It was page 1, line 1. People said no, and it's time to put an end to this and start focusing on people's real priorities.
Let's hear from the audience. Man in the blue shirt here, and then we'll go down the back. Yes, on you go.
I always look at the independence argument as in the cost of staying in the UK, and you get the cheek palm, to talk about change, and then in the next line say about childhood poverty, when Keir Starmer's saying there's no money to lift the two-child benefit cap. I think it's an absolute shame. It's that sort of hypocrisy that you can, with good faith, mention child poverty.
Thank you. Man on the front row, here.
Yeah. Although it was a Westminster election, I based my findings on how the SNP runs Scotland. When you look at things like Fergus Marine and the ferry fiascos, they couldn't run a Manoj.
Man in the glasses.
How can we trust that Labour's going to fight for Scotland when Keir Starmer says, regardless of what, he's not really going to open up the independence vote? So if Scotland says we want it, he's going to say nope. And Anna Starwer says it's up to the Scottish people, but nobody on any pro-unionist party will say what the route is. And as for the Conservative Party, I'm sorry, Douglas Ross went on about independence more than the SNP and said the only way to get rid of the SNP is to vote in a Conservative government. Sorry, did he lose his seat to the SNP? Cheers.
The SNP also lost. They had 48 seats and went down to 9. You're speaking about 1 seat. We held 5 of our 6
Where
seats across
reform
Scotland.
played a key role in him losing his seat.
And I'm sorry, but we lost 5 out of... We kept 5 out of 6 seats across Scotland, despite the difficult circumstances that we had nationally. I think that that's a very clear message from the people of Scotland, that they're sick, fed up with this division. They want us to get on. We're talking about people's real priorities. They want us to focus on tackling education, poverty, council cuts, all this sort of stuff that we are not focusing on in Holyrood, because once again, we are yet again talking about independence.
Man on the front row here. Yes.
There's a deficit of rights here. I mean, there's pictures in the newspapers today of Starmer standing beside Mary Lou and Michelle in the north of Ireland, and his face is like thunder. And he's like that because he knows that the Northern Ireland has the right now, per the Good Friday Agreement, to have a cross-border Poland independence. Scotland doesn't have that right.
Well, Scotland did have the right in 2014 and Scotland voted in 2014. Scotland also voted last week and, like the rest of the UK, gave a mandate to the Labour Party to govern for them.
I withheld my vote. I spoiled my vote because I wasn't supporting them, because there hasn't been one mea culpa from the SNP since last week. Sorry.
On you go.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I listened carefully earlier when you said you spoiled your vote. And I think that actually speaks to a bigger problem I think we have in politics. And all of us have got a challenge to address that. People are sick, fed up of politics in general. One of the things that I overwhelmingly heard on the door, other than the NHS needs to be fixed, education standards are falling in Scotland and that needs to be fixed, and poverty is something that we need to get a grip on. And while I'm on that, just to say that Keir Starmer's been really clear, and the Labour Party is really clear, that we will review universal credit, because let me tell you, it's not just the 2-child cap that's a problem with universal credit. It goes much, much wider than that. But we heard people on the door saying that they were fed up. They didn't trust people. They didn't trust politicians. That's a really, really big problem that we have. We have to get the faith back in politics and in governing, and I think that's something that my party will take very, very seriously, because people have lost hope, and I'm just about to finish, sorry Stephen, people have lost hope, and we'll fight every day to make people believe again.
Your views on that and everything else you hear in the programme, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our next question of the night, which comes from Veronica Phillips. Evening,
Hi.
Veronica. Hi.
Good evening. Hi. What are the panel's views on early release of prisoners due to overcrowding in prisons, and what steps have been taken to ensure public safety?
Thank you. This is an issue north and south of the border. Scotland locks up more people per head of the population than just about any other country in Europe. We've got 500 at the moment, short-term sentences, about to be released to try and free up capacity in the system. Thomas Kerr.
Well, look, it's deeply worrying, and we heard years ago from Nicola Sturgeon that she would end automatic early release. That hasn't happened, and instead we're falling backwards in this. And you're right, Stephen, it is an issue that we're facing across the whole UK. That's because of a lack of investment inside our prison service, and that goes to my own party as well as the SNP here in Scotland. So I am very concerned about it, but I'm more concerned here in Scotland because of the cuts that we've seen towards the police force. If you speak to police officers in Scotland, they say that they've lost funding and that we're down when it comes to police numbers. So I am very, very concerned about the level of public safety that we're going to have here if we start to do something like that. So I think it's the wrong decision to do, and I think it just shows yet again the soft touch approach that the SNP has to justice.
Kevin McKenna, do we need to take a different view on this? The new UK Prisons Minister, James Timpson, has said only a third of people in prison should be in prison at the moment. Do we need to step back and take a completely different view of criminal justice? rather than just releasing people when we reach the point of crisis?
Yeah, we do. I'm smiling because I was wondering how long it was going to take the Tory to talk about soft touch justice. Thank you, Thomas.
I'm glad to please you, Kevin.
Yeah, we do. This comes up, it has come up every couple of years. We wring our hands. I was writing about this prior to 2014, that Scotland locks up more of its population by percentage than most other, if not all other countries in Europe. There are many reasons for this, and you know, we like to think of ourselves as a progressive country. Even Tories, you know, we like to think of ourselves as enlightened, as you know, paying attention to the needs of those that have the least in society. The overwhelming majority of people in our prisons are poor, have got a very complicated, interlocking number of social challenges. That's always been the case. And if you're going to look at that, you can't look at this in isolation. If you're going to look at reforming prison or you know, the concept of letting more people out because we're not building enough prisons, we don't have enough police officers, you can't look at that without actually looking at the social challenges, the complicated set of social challenges that the vast majority of people in prisons face. And the fact that, and this goes back, this is like a condemnation of our entire post-war political system and those who have held power both before devolution and after it. I'll sum this up, right, and this is not an attack on the SNP, but prior to the 2014 referendum, there was a campaign to allow a certain proportion of prisoners to vote in the referendum, because this was, you know, the result of this wasn't just going to be able to be overturned at the next election. You know, this was going to affect them when they came out of jail. Now, I know SNP people at the time, you know, who are social democrats, who in their heart knew that this was the right thing to do. You know, as Charles Dickens was writing over 100 years ago, the way that a society treats the people in prison, treats its prisoners, is one of the building blocks of a civilised society. So despite the fact that a lot of people in civic Scotland knew that the right thing to do was just to take that a little risk, okay, it might risk, you know, falling out with the leader writer of the Daily Mail or the Conservatives, they knew that was the right thing to do. They set their faces against it because they were fear. They were fear of their shadow, they were fear of the messaging. And I thought, you know, this isn't going to change. This isn't going to change in terms of how we treat our prisoners, the conditions that we keep them in. And, you know, we're talking about it tonight. Keir Starmer will, you know, do what he'll usually do, and it'll be a working party. The SNP will do, you know, wring their hands. I guarantee, if debate night is still going in 5 years, and of course it will still be going in 5 years, Stephen, we'll be discussing this again.
Nicola McEwen, what do you think?
So we're talking about this tonight because of the decision to release prisoners early because of overcrowding. And my worry with that is that it is an isolated decision where I think we need to take a step back and think of the much bigger picture and the much bigger approach. I think there probably, it's not my area of expertise, I have to say, but I think there probably are too many people that get custodial sentences when there are a variety of community sentencing options that are used much more widely in other countries than they are here. And I know that there is evidence to suggest that reoffending is less for certain groups of prisoners if you go down the community order route rather than imprisonment. So all of that, I think I'm broadly comfortable with the approach that is taken, but it does need to have backup in terms of resources for what then happens in the community. What is the support that people get when they are released into the community to support their rehabilitation? And even going much further back than this, we need to start thinking about this in terms of prevention in the first place, because you are right, Kevin, there are so many of the social problems and the economic problems that are at the root of the high prison population in the first place, and intervention at that early stage, I think will be much more effective in the longer run.
We're running out of time here, but Ben McPherson, does the appointment of James Timpson give pause for thought on how we should do things differently here in Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, both really thoughtful contributions either side of me, and all I would add to that is that I do think the appointment is welcome, and the Justice Secretary has done so. This is one of several really big issues. One of the audience members talked about that earlier, that we collectively need to engage in, get into a 21st century mindset and be brave in order to think of new solutions. Prevention, rehabilitation and support are the key aspects.
Yeah. Pam, is this one area where there could be very good cooperation between Holyrood and Westminster on a new way forward for prisons in the UK?
I think so, if what we've just heard on the panel represents how the governments work together, and I think that it probably will. I think all the points that have been made around prevention are important, and as we're running out of time, I won't repeat them. But the release of prisoners in Scotland, again, I have to say, though, has been a bit of a sticking plaster solution to a bigger problem that should have really been seen coming, to be honest. And I think if the government...
You've inherited that problem now south of the border.
Precisely. So both the Tories and the SNP didn't see it coming, and we've been left yet again with a mess to clear up. But there are two things that worry me slightly about this. And I think Nicola touched on it. It's not been very well thought out in terms of what that means for communities. First of all, for victims. So victims have to proactively go and find out if the person, the perpetrator in that circumstance, has been released, rather than there being a much more proactive way to reach victims. And secondly, local authorities are now going to have a number of people who are coming out of prison who, for various reasons, may not have support networks, may not even have a house to go to, and may find themselves in very vulnerable situations. And I don't think that's been thought through, and I think that's a bit of a recipe for disaster, and I hope that the governments will work together to make sure that it works well.
We've only got 30 seconds left, but final contribution, that man there, yes.
I'm all for what Pam says about victims, because I think the prisoners are getting released too early, and I don't think there's that support there for victims of crimes. Or victims of the crimes, and I think that should be put in place before these prisoners are just getting released back into society.
Before the release takes place. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And that's it for tonight. We are now off for our summer break. We'll be back with you, though, in September. A full list of all the locations then will be on our website, bbc.co.uk/debate. Now, if you missed any of tonight's show, we're on a bit later on BBC One Scotland, or you can catch it any time that suits you on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight and our audience in Maryhill, and to you at home for watching. We'll see you in September. In the meantime, have a great summer. I hope the rain stops. From all of us here, good night.